16 world championships, the jet-flying, limousine-riding, kiss-stealing, wheeling-dealing son of a gun. The man who could walk into any arena on the planet and steal the show, steal your girl, and steal the main event spot all in the same night. For 4 decades, Ric Flair was professional wrestling, the living, breathing embodiment of everything the business aspired to be. But there was one man who saw through all of it. One man who watched the Nature Boy from closer than anyone else, who helped build him into the icon he became, and who quietly, persistently tried to warn everyone about the cracks forming beneath that diamond-studded surface. A man whose words were dismissed as old-school thinking, as jealousy, as a relic of a bygone era clinging to traditions that no longer mattered. That man was Harley Race, and he was right about everything. To understand why Harley Race's perspective on Ric Flair matters, you first have to understand who Harley Race was. Because without that context, none of this makes sense. Harley Race was born in 1943 in Quitman, Missouri, to sharecropping parents who had absolutely nothing. No money, no connections, no safety net. Everything Harley Race ever achieved in his life, he clawed out of the dirt with his bare hands. By 15, he was already chasing his dream in professional wrestling. By 18, he was married. 5 weeks later, his young wife Vivian was dead, killed instantly in a car crash that nearly cost Harley his leg. Doctors told him he would never walk again. His wrestling career was over before it had barely begun. They were wrong. Harley Race didn't just walk again. He came back and became the most dominant NWA World Heavyweight Champion in history. 8 title reigns, a record that stood for years. He carried that championship belt around the world, defending it 7 nights a week, 365 days a year, in territories from Tokyo to Toronto, from St. Louis to Singapore. And he did it the hard way. No shortcuts, no politics, no complaining. Just get in the car, drive to the next town, and prove every single night that you deserve to carry the most prestigious title in professional wrestling. That's what being champion meant to Harley Race. It wasn't just a prop, and it wasn't just a storyline. It was a sacred responsibility. The NWA World Heavyweight Championship represented the entire business, every promoter, every territory, every wrestler who busted their body night after night in small towns and big arenas. And the man who carried that belt had an obligation, a duty, to represent the business with dignity, with toughness, and with respect. Harley Race didn't just believe this, he lived it. He embodied it so completely that even his worst enemies in the business couldn't deny it. He took the business seriously, and he treated the coveted gold belt with respect. He conducted himself like a champion in and out of the ring. Few title holders have ever carried the belt with such distinction. When he walked into a bar after a show, he carried himself like the world champion. When he interacted with fans, he maintained the mystique. When someone disrespected the business in his presence, they learned very quickly why that was a mistake. There are stories of Harley Race that sound like they belong in a movie. Walking into pool halls and knocking everyone's quarters off the table, putting his own down and daring anyone to say something about it. Nobody ever did. Confronting Hell's Angels bikers who tried to cause trouble at his shows. Going after Hulk Hogan with a pistol when the World Wrestling Federation tried to promote in his Kansas City territory. When he couldn't find Hogan, he set the ring on fire. Set the ring on fire. This was a man who took the wrestling business as seriously as a heart attack. And when he passed the torch to Ric Flair at the first Starrcade, in November of 1983, he believed he was handing the keys to someone who would carry that same standard forward. And for a while, it looked like he was right. The story of Starrcade 1983 is one of the most important chapters in wrestling history. Harley Race was the champion. Ric Flair was the challenger. The storyline was beautiful in its simplicity. Race, the aging champion, put a $25,000 bounty on Flair's head to keep him from ever getting a title shot. Bob Orton Jr. and Dick Slater collected the bounty by delivering a devastating piledriver that seemingly ended Flair's career. Flair announced his retirement, but then he came back, swinging a baseball bat, and demanded his shot at Race. Behind the scenes, the story was even more dramatic. Vince McMahon, who was in the process of swallowing up the entire wrestling industry, flew Race to New York and offered him $250,000 to skip Starrcade and bring the NWA title to the World Wrestling Federation. Think about what that would have meant. The entire NWA, the backbone of professional wrestling for decades, would have been crippled overnight. The most prestigious championship in the business would have been handed to Hulk Hogan in some kind of unification match, and the territory system would have collapsed even faster than it already was. Race turned McMahon down flat. He said he could not look himself in the mirror if he betrayed the business like that. By some accounts, McMahon actually tried to physically attack Race after being rejected. According to Race's own autobiography, McMahon attempted a leg dive on him. That went about as well as you would expect. Race stuffed the takedown, got McMahon in a chokehold, and put him to sleep. Because apparently Vince McMahon thought it was a good idea to shoot on Harley Race. In a bathroom, after being told no, Race showed up to Starrcade. He dropped the title to Flair. And in doing so, he handed Ric Flair the greatest gift anyone in the wrestling business has ever received. Not just a championship belt, an entire era, an entire identity. Without Harley Race, there was no Nature Boy as we know him. Without that Starrcade moment, Ric Flair is just another good wrestler from the Carolinas. Harley Race made Ric Flair, and Flair knew it. He said it himself, publicly, for decades. Without Starrcade, without Harley Race, there is no Ric Flair. He was already a made man, and Harley made me that night. But here's where the story starts to turn. Because Harley Race didn't just hand Flair the championship, he tried to hand him something much more important. A philosophy, a code, a way of being champion that went beyond the matches and the promos and the robes and the limousines. Race believed that the world champion had an obligation to represent the business at all times. That the man who carried the belt should carry himself with a certain standard of professionalism, of discipline, of respect for what that title meant to the thousands of men who had broken their bodies to build the industry. And that's where Flair started to diverge from the path Race had laid out for him. See, Ric Flair didn't just play a character, he became the character. The limousine-riding, jet-flying lifestyle wasn't an act. Flair lived it every night. The expensive suits, the custom robes that cost thousands of dollars each, the drinking, the partying, the women, the spending, the absolute refusal to distinguish between Ric Flair, the character, and Richard Morgan Flieres, the man. And Harley Race saw it happening long before most people did. He saw his protégé, the man he had personally chosen to carry the torch for professional wrestling, slowly disappearing beneath the spotlight. Race himself lived hard. Nobody could accuse Harley Race of being clean-cut or careful. He drank heavily, smoked constantly, and carried himself like an old-school outlaw. He could finish a case of beer, chain-smoke 2 packs of Marlboros, sleep for a few hours, then wake up the next morning and wrestle for an hour like nothing had happened. That was the culture of wrestling in those days. Tough men pushed their bodies to impossible limits and treated pain like a normal part of life. But even Harley Race understood discipline. Underneath all the chaos, he knew where the line was. The championship always came first. The business always came first. If you were the world champion, you represented the entire industry. Promoters trusted you with their biggest crowds. Wrestlers trusted you with their livelihoods. Fans trusted you to show up and deliver every single night. Race understood that being champion was more than fame. It was responsibility. Ric Flair understood that responsibility inside the ring. Nobody could question his performances. Night after night, city after city, he wrestled like his life depended on it. He bled for the business. He turned ordinary matches into unforgettable battles. Crowds loved him because he made every opponent look dangerous while still carrying himself like the greatest wrestler alive. But outside the ring, things were different. Outside the ring, the lines between Ric Flair the performer and Ric Flair the man slowly disappeared. The Nature Boy character was supposed to be an act. It was wrestling theater. Expensive suits, flashy robes, limousines, beautiful women, endless champagne, and loud confidence. Fans were supposed to look at him and see excess turned into entertainment. But over time, Flair stopped treating it like a performance. The gimmick became his actual identity. He didn't just play the Nature Boy on television anymore. He lived as the Nature Boy every hour of every day. That lifestyle came with a price. The non-stop partying became an addiction to attention, money, and excess. Flair spent enormous amounts of cash trying to maintain the image everyone expected from him. Custom robes covered in rhinestones cost thousands of dollars each. Nights out at bars turned into massive tabs. Limousines, hotels, gifts, flights, and parties became normal parts of his everyday life. He wanted every room he walked into to feel like an event. And for a while, it worked. Ric Flair became larger than wrestling itself. He was the image of fame, confidence, and luxury. But underneath all that success, cracks were forming. Throughout the 1980s, Flair simply ignored his taxes. It wasn't an occasional mistake or an accounting problem. He just didn't pay them. Year after year passed while he earned enormous amounts of money as one of the biggest stars in professional wrestling. He traveled across the world defending the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, headlined major arenas, and became one of the highest-paid wrestlers of his era. Yet while money poured into his hands, almost none of it was being managed responsibly. Part of the problem was the wrestling lifestyle itself. Wrestlers in that era lived on the road constantly. They moved from city to city so fast that real life barely existed anymore. Financial planning was almost non-existent. Many wrestlers believed the money would never stop flowing. Flair especially lived like tomorrow didn't matter. If he made $50,000, he spent $60,000. If he made $100,000, he spent $200,000. The image had to stay alive no matter what. By 1990, the consequences finally started catching up to him. Flair settled some of his back taxes from 1982, 1983, and 1988, paying around $62,000 to the IRS. For most people, that amount alone would have been devastating. For Flair, it was only the beginning of a much larger problem. The debt kept growing because the habits never changed. He continued spending recklessly while financial pressure quietly followed him everywhere. The IRS became like a shadow hanging over his entire career. No matter how successful he became, the financial chaos stayed close behind. During the 1990s and the early 2000s, Flair was still one of the most recognizable names in wrestling. Fans saw the robes, the Rolex watches, the interviews, and the legendary entrances. They heard the famous woo and assumed he was living like a king. But behind the scenes, the reality was far uglier. By 2000, the IRS placed a lien on Flair's estate for an astonishing $874,000. Nearly $1 million owed in taxes. It was the kind of number that showed just how badly things had spiraled out of control. Even then, the public image barely changed. Flair kept performing, he kept appearing on television, he kept acting like the rich, untouchable superstar fans had always known. That was the strange tragedy of Ric Flair's life. The character became a prison. He felt pressure to keep living up to the fantasy, even when the fantasy was destroying him financially. Wrestling fans expected Ric Flair to arrive in style, dressed in expensive clothes, talking about money, women, and luxury. Admitting financial problems would have shattered the illusion he spent decades creating. By 2005, the situation became impossible to hide. The IRS started directly seizing portions of his WWE earnings straight from his paycheck. Imagine that for a moment. One of the most famous wrestlers in history, a man celebrated as a living legend, having his income intercepted by the government because years of financial chaos had finally caught up to him. It was humiliating, but it also revealed something deeper about the wrestling business itself. So many stars from that era lived recklessly because they believed the fame would last forever. For Ric Flair, the money always came and went fast, but the consequences never stopped following him. And it wasn't just the taxes, it was everything. 5 marriages, 5 divorces, each one more expensive than the last. Alimony payments of $20,000 a month. Lawsuits from promoters he had stiffed on appearances. Lawsuits from business partners. A disastrous venture called Ric Flair Finance, an online lending company that was shut down by the state of North Carolina because Flair did not even have a broker's license to operate it. His business partner then sued him for $115,000 over an unpaid loan. By the time Flair was evicted from his Charlotte home in 2012, unable to make rent, the full picture had become impossible to ignore. Here was the greatest professional wrestler of his generation, a man who had earned millions upon millions of dollars over a career spanning 4 decades, and he was essentially broke. His net worth had been estimated at around $500,000. He had borrowed $800,000 from Vince McMahon just to stay afloat and paid it back by surrendering his entire WrestleMania 24 paycheck, the largest of his career. Even then, the spending did not stop. In 2009, while drowning in debt, Flair spent $14,000 on Christmas gifts and $200,000 on jewelry. The man simply could not stop being the nature boy, even when being the nature boy was destroying him financially, personally, and physically. And that is just the money. The personal conduct issues painted an even darker picture. The Dark Side of the Ring documentary about the 2002 plane ride from hell brought forward allegations of inappropriate behavior that had been whispered about for years. Flair himself admitted that the description of him walking down the aisle of the plane, spinning his private parts around, was accurate. He apologized for it. He called it a case of drinking too much and being inappropriate. But the damage was done. WWE removed his merchandise from their shop. Commercial campaigns featuring Flair were paused. His legacy, the one that Harley Race had helped build from the ground up at Starrcade 1983, was tarnishing in real time. And through all of it, through decades of financial ruin and personal scandal and behavior that would have ended anyone else's career 10 times over, the wrestling industry largely gave Flair a pass. Because he was Ric Flair, because he was the greatest of all time, because the 16 World Championships and the 5-star matches and the promos that made you believe somehow outweighed everything else. The industry looked at the robes and the Rolex watches and the Space Mountain references and laughed along with him, enabling the very behavior that was slowly tearing the man apart. But Harley Race wasn't laughing. He never was. Harley Race came from a completely different era of professional wrestling, an era where the World Championship was treated almost like a sacred responsibility. To Race and the wrestlers of his generation, the title was never just a prop used to move storylines forward on television. It represented the entire business. The man holding that championship carried the reputation of wrestling itself everywhere he went. Every appearance mattered. Every interview mattered. Every match mattered. You weren't just representing yourself anymore. You were representing every champion who came before you and every promoter trusting you to draw money for their territory. Race believed deeply in that old-school code. It was simple, but it meant everything. You showed up no matter how hurt you were. You handled your responsibilities. You respected the locker room. You protected the illusion of the business at all costs. And above all else, you carried yourself with dignity because the championship demanded it. Fans were supposed to look at the world champion and believe they were seeing the very best wrestler alive, not just physically but mentally too. A champion was expected to project strength, discipline, and control. Harley Race lived by those rules his entire career. He fought through injuries most people couldn't imagine. He wrestled in pain constantly. Stories about Race surviving car crashes, broken bones, and brutal travel schedules became legendary inside wrestling circles. Yet no matter how wild his personal life could get, he never let the championship become secondary. The business always came first. That was the line he refused to cross. And when he looked at Ric Flair during the later years of Flair's career, Race saw someone drifting further and further away from that philosophy. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't bitterness. Harley Race genuinely respected Ric Flair's talent. In many ways, Flair was the perfect successor to him inside the ring. He could wrestle anyone, anywhere, under any circumstances, and make the crowd believe every second of it. Flair had charisma that few wrestlers in history could match. He could walk into an arena wearing an expensive robe, scream into a microphone for 5 minutes, and have the audience completely hypnotized. Race knew better than anyone how special that kind of talent really was. But talent alone wasn't enough for someone like Harley Race. When Race looked at Flair, especially as the years went on, he saw a man being consumed by his own creation. The Nature Boy character had stopped being an act a long time ago. It had become Ric Flair's entire identity. The confidence, the partying, the non-stop spending, the drinking, the need for attention, the obsession with living like the richest man in every room. It all became permanent. There was no separation anymore between the performer and the person behind the performer. That terrified Race because he understood exactly how dangerous that kind of lifestyle could become. Wrestling already pushed people toward excess naturally. The travel never stopped. Wrestlers lived in hotels, airports, bars, and arenas more than they lived at home. Crowds cheered them every night. Fans treated them like larger-than-life heroes. Money came fast, especially for top stars, and many wrestlers developed the feeling that the ride would never end. But most veterans eventually learned how to step back from it, at least enough to survive. They understood that the spotlight was temporary. Flair never seemed capable of stepping away. The expensive suits weren't just costumes anymore. They became necessities. The parties weren't occasional celebrations, they became part of everyday life. The image of Ric Flair as the endlessly wealthy, endlessly confident superstar became something he felt forced to maintain at all times. Even when his finances were collapsing, even when the IRS was chasing him, even when personal relationships around him were breaking apart, he still tried to live like the Nature Boy because he did not know how to be anything else. Harley Race could see the disaster coming years before most people admitted it out loud. Race belonged to a generation that believed a wrestler needed control over himself first before he could lead the business. That did not mean wrestlers had to be saints. Far from it. Many old-school wrestlers drank heavily, fought constantly, and lived rough lives. But there was still a level of discipline underneath all of it. They knew when to stop. They knew when responsibility had to come before pleasure. With Flair, that balance slowly disappeared. The drinking got heavier, the spending got more reckless. The lifestyle became more extreme with every passing year. Instead of controlling the character controlled him. The Nature Boy image demanded constant excess, and Flair kept feeding it because the audience loved it. Fans did not just want Ric Flair the wrestler, they wanted Ric Flair the myth. The limousine-riding, champagne-drinking, diamond-wearing superstar who looked like he belonged in a completely different world from ordinary people. But maintaining a myth forever is impossible. Race understood that better than almost anyone because he had already lived through wrestling's hardest years. He knew fame fades, money disappears, bodies break down. Eventually, every wrestler has to face life outside the spotlight. And when Race looked at Flair, he saw someone who seemed emotionally incapable of existing without the performance. Someone who had spent so many years pretending to be larger than life that he no longer knew how to live like a normal human being. That was the real tragedy Harley Race saw coming. Not just financial problems or personal scandals, but the complete loss of identity. Ric Flair became trapped inside the very character that made him famous. The Nature Boy made him a legend, but it also slowly consumed the man underneath until the line between reality and performance almost vanished completely. The tragedy of it is that Flair knew Race was right. He always did. Every time Flair talked about Harley Race in public, there was genuine reverence, genuine respect, and genuine acknowledgement that Race was the standard he was trying to live up to and consistently falling short of. Flair told Sports Illustrated after Race's death in 2019, "Harley Race represents the epitome of what the world champion was. Myself and everyone that followed, we were representing the company, but we weren't the world champion the way Harley Race was." Read that quote again. "We weren't the world champion the way Harley Race was." That is not false modesty. That is a confession. Flair was admitting in his own way that he had taken the gift Race gave him at Starrcade and used it to build something extraordinary, but also something deeply flawed. Something that sparkled on the outside but was rotting from within. Race, for his part, never publicly trashed Flair. That was not his way. In shoot interviews and conventions where they appeared together, the two men put each other over constantly. They told Rhodes stories. They laughed about the old days. Race called Flair the best performer he had ever seen. Flair called Race the toughest man in the history of the sport. On the surface, it was mutual admiration between two legends. But beneath that surface, there was always a tension. A fundamental disagreement about what it meant to be champion. To represent the business, to carry yourself as a professional wrestler. Race believed the champion should be bigger than his vices. Flair believed the vices were part of what made the champion. And the wrestling business, for the most part, sided with Flair, because Flair's version was more exciting, more entertaining, more marketable. The jet-flying, limousine-riding lifestyle sold tickets and put butts in seats in a way that Race's quiet dignity never could. But look at the scoreboard now. Harley Race died in August 2019 at the age of 76 after a battle with lung cancer. He had spent his final years running a wrestling school in Missouri, training the next generation, giving back to the business that had given him everything. He was broke at various points after his career, and he dealt with his own demons, his own tragedies, and his own financial struggles. But he rebuilt. He married a woman named BJ, who became his partner in everything. He stayed connected to the business in a meaningful way. He was respected, genuinely respected, by everyone who ever knew him. Flair, meanwhile, was being sued by former Ring of Honor owner Carrie Silkin for $41,000 in unpaid appearance fees. He was dealing with ongoing tax liens. He was watching his reputation take hits from documentaries and allegations. He was still, at his advanced age, trying to monetize the Nature Boy character through cannabis brands, virtual restaurants, and autograph signings, still chasing the lifestyle that had defined and ultimately diminished him. The wrestling world loves to celebrate Ric Flair. And in many ways, he deserves that celebration. What he accomplished inside the ring was genuinely extraordinary. His matches with Ricky Steamboat, his feuds with Dusty Rhodes and Terry Funk, his ability to make any opponent look like $1 million. These are real achievements that no amount of personal failure can erase. But Harley Race understood something that much of the wrestling world either ignored or simply refused to admit. Being world champion was never only about what happened inside the ring. It wasn't just about having great matches, cutting legendary promos, or hearing crowds scream your name every night. To Race, the championship represented something much bigger than entertainment. It represented responsibility. The man carrying that title wasn't only the top wrestler in the company, he was the public face of the entire industry. Every action mattered. The way you treated promoters mattered. The way you treated fans mattered. The way you handled your money, your relationships, your reputation, and your personal life all mattered because the champion was supposed to symbolize professionalism. Race believed the title demanded discipline even outside the arena lights. A real champion knew when to stop drinking. A real champion honored his commitments. A real champion paid his debts, respected the people around him, and carried himself in a way that protected the reputation of the business itself. That mindset came from an older generation of wrestling. A time when wrestlers treated the industry almost like a brotherhood. The world champion traveled from territory to territory, representing every promoter who trusted him to sell tickets. If the champion embarrassed himself publicly, it reflected badly on the entire profession. Race never forgot that responsibility for a second of his life. He saw a man who no longer knew how to separate performance from reality. He saw someone trapped inside a character that demanded constant excess. The drinking wasn't occasional anymore, the spending wasn't under control anymore. The partying never seemed to end. Flair wasn't simply enjoying success, he was chasing an image every single day of his life because he felt he had to keep proving he was still the nature boy. Race understood how exhausting and destructive that could become because he had spent his own career fighting to maintain discipline under brutal circumstances. Unlike many people in wrestling, Harley Race rarely tried to teach through speeches or public criticism. That wasn't his style. He believed people learned more by watching how a man lived than by listening to what he said. So instead of giving long lectures, Race tried to lead through example. One of the clearest examples came during the territorial wars of professional wrestling. Vince McMahon was aggressively expanding the World Wrestling Federation across the country, offering huge amounts of money to stars from other promotions. Race was reportedly offered around $250,000 to betray the NWA while he was still world champion. In the wrestling world of that era, that kind of move would have been seen as abandoning the traditions that older wrestlers believed in. Race turned the offer down because he believed loyalty to the championship and to the business mattered more than a massive payday. Even small details about Race reflected that mindset. He insisted on driving everywhere himself whenever possible. Other wrestlers joked about it, but for Race it was about control. The champion was supposed to stay in command of every situation. He did not want to depend on anyone else to get him where he needed to be. That attitude carried into every part of his life. Control mattered, discipline mattered, self-respect mattered. Discipline defined how he lived and how he expected others to behave. Later in life, Race brought that same mentality to his wrestling school in Missouri. By then, he had already become a legend, but he still approached training young wrestlers with the same seriousness he brought to the ring decades earlier. He pushed students hard because he believed wrestling deserved commitment. He taught them that talent alone was not enough. Anybody could learn moves. Anybody could memorize promos. Becoming a true professional required mental toughness, discipline, and respect for the business itself. Race knew Ric Flair had extraordinary gifts. In many ways, Flair became an even bigger star than Race ever was. But Race also knew that success without boundaries could slowly destroy a person from the inside. He watched Flair continue chasing the party lifestyle year after year, long after most people would have slowed down. He watched the financial problems grow. He watched the endless need for validation and attention consume more and more of Flair's life. Boundaries mattered to Race because without them, a person could unravel. Eventually, the spotlight fades, the money slows down, the crowds get quieter. At some point, every wrestler has to face who they are without the performance. Harley Race understood the truth better than almost anyone. And when he looked at Ric Flair, he saw a man who had spent so many years living as a character that he no longer knew how to exist without it. And nobody listened. Not because they could not hear him, but because they did not want to. Because the Nature Boy version of professional wrestling was so much more fun than the Harley Race version. Because it is easier to celebrate the excess than to admire the discipline. Because the wrestling business has always preferred the sizzle to the steak. But time has a way of proving people right. And time has proven Harley Race right about everything. About the importance of discipline. About the responsibility that comes with being champion. About the danger of letting the character consume the man. About what happens when an entire industry enables behavior that should have been checked decades ago. Responsibility is part of what a champion carries. Harley Race saw all of this coming. He tried to prevent it. He tried to show through his own example what a champion should be. And the business looked at him and said, "Thanks, old man, but we like Ric's way better." Like and subscribe for more hard-hitting wrestling documentaries. Until next time.